Hello, Hannah.
Hi, Deb.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm really excited for this show. This
Me
is
too.
this is a topic. Well, before we jump in, I'm like, let's talk because I'm so excited about this. I really am. I'm super excited about this topic. But before we get started with Success Without School for today, August 2nd, 2022, welcome to The Reason We Learn and our show, Success Without School. This is a weekly show that we've been doing to help you think outside the typical school paradigm, the institutional paradigm, about ways your kids and you can get an education without school, and not just get an education, but succeed without being inside the typical format, the typical buildings or whatever. And we're not strictly talking about homeschooling here. We're talking about all the different ways there are to educate yourself. So if you're new to the channel or the show or both, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, sharing. All of it feeds the algorithm, helps us get the word out to more people. And thank you so much for being here with me, Deb Philman, and your host, Hannah Frankman of Rebel Educator. And you can find her on Substack and on Twitter, by the way. She's fabulous. So the thing that's one of the things, there are many things, but one of the things that sets Hannah apart is that she's a grown-up homeschooler. So if you haven't been with us for our first two shows, she talks about her story in the first one. And so she has a unique perspective when it comes to success without school, K through 12, but she also did not go to four-year college. So this is kind of her thing, what we're going to talk about today, how to build credibility without having gone. Is the volume really loud, David? Am I screaming?
That's so weird. You sound normal to me.
Okay. Tell me if it's too loud because it was a little loud when I first came on and I turned it down.
That's weird. Is it both of us? Do I sound like I'm yelling too? Because I'm definitely not yelling.
Well, we'll keep going unless we hear from David. He says, ouch, volume. Maybe his volume was loud like mine was when I turned on and I was like,
I
turn it down.
was like,
Okay.
hello, Deb. And you were like, please stop talking.
That's okay. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So Hannah has been wildly successful without college, I think, in my estimation of success, because she's also happy and solvent, which is key. And but she also does coaching. So this is something that she does to help other people as well. So today she's going to be sort of coaching all of you and me. And I'm going to lay it up for you here, Hannah. First of all, let's just stick to the status quo. Let's define it, make sure everybody knows what we're talking about when we say credibility. Because as I understand that, right now, people tell their kids, by and large, on most people, and the high schools and the prep schools and so forth, they don't really say, "Are you going to college?" It's which college are you applying to, or which colleges are you applying to, and what's your reach school, and what's your backup school, and there isn't really a how do you envision your life? Maybe you'll go to college. It's where will you go to college? So the default position, which it wasn't necessarily for our parents and grandparents, is that college is almost like this extension of high school, and they start talking to you about it in junior year of high school if you go to school. And kids often don't get presented with any other options, or they're made to believe that the other options are somehow not going to give them the credibility they need in the marketplace. And by credibility, I mean, you know, all those things that where people say, I want to work with you. I want to hire you. You're somebody I should take seriously. You're intelligent. You know how to make your way in the adult world. And so that's kind of how I see it. What would you add to that? Or did I get anything wrong there?
No, I think you nailed it. I think you nailed both the experience of it, because that was, even as a homeschooler, that was my experience. I did well in school, so everybody was always asking me, where do you want to go to college? And I feel like these questions started in like middle school, which is ridiculous. But it's just such a huge part of the status quo. Everybody just assumes if you do okay in school, of course you're going to college. So I think you nailed the experience side. In terms of credibility, I think for a lot of people, it is a very nebulous concept that they don't define very well, which is part of why they just default to the status quo, because they know they need this thing called credibility in order to be successful and get a job and make money and be quote unquote happy and successful and like have an acceptable life. Like it's all very nebulous. It's not well examined. But they know they need this credibility thing. So they just default to the path that everyone else has taken that seems to lead to success. So if I do the same thing, I'll probably be okay, is kind of the default assumption. But I
Right.
think for most people, it's really a matter of, I think they see credibility as the world taking them seriously and the world thinking that they are good enough. There's a lot of this like self-esteem worth baked into this too. Like you're good enough to hold a job and to be, again, taken seriously, to for people to want to work with you, for people to listen to and respect the ideas that you have. We grow up inside of a system where people who have credentials are the ones who are respected and the ones who are promoted and the ones who are put in front of us as the experts. And if you want the implicit assumption that's baked into that is that if you want to be taken seriously, you need some of these types of credentials too. And so
And have you
everybody
noticed?
from a very young age that you have to go to college and get your PhD in whatever in order to have a valid opinion about X topic. And so you're just kind of, there's this assumption that you're kind of a nobody if you don't take that path, and nobody's going to want to take you seriously or work with you. And it's a very emotional thing. It's a very
Right.
deeply ingrained emotional thing. And that makes it even harder to break out of, because it's not just a practical,
Right.
not just
That's
a
so
practical problem. It's a very emotional, there's a lot of, again, self-worth baked into it. Everybody talks about like, oh, well, my daughter's going to Stanford, and everybody else is like, oh, well, my daughter is not going to Stanford. So like,
right.
there's this almost shame that comes with it sometimes of not going to the
What did
right
I do
school or not being.
wrong? My kid's not, it's one of the first questions I get about homeschooling. How will they get into college? And you're like, I don't know about you, but I'm raising an adult. I'm not raising a college student, but that's okay. That's like, but never mind that we go into the whole homeschool kids get into college very easily. That's not the issue. But I noticed something else too. In entertainment, they'll often depict a character, and it's often female, but not always. They'll depict a character who has not gone to college for some reason. It becomes part of the character. And 9 times out of 10, they'll depict it as like, I didn't finish because some external thing prevented them. They got married, got pregnant, didn't finish college. They dropped out because they had to make money. It's seen as this like almost a marker of delay in your ability to be successful. If you either didn't go or didn't finish, something bad must have happened, and they'll put that right in the movie or the book or whatever, like, oh, poor so and so didn't go to college or couldn't finish college. And then very often at the end of it, they'll be like, I'm going back to college now as an adult. I mean, we even had whole movies about like Rodney Dangerfield, multi-millionaire developer, but he's going back to school, and this is supposed to be, and they're all looking down their noses at him. I like the way the movie made it seem like, well, he actually knew a little bit more than the business professor. But why was he even there? That to me was my cue to like, why am I even going to pass these stupid exams? Like I'm doing fine, but he had to have that degree. I want to finish. And the message that goes out in the culture is that a piece of paper is a measure of your credibility, your self-worth, and even class, because they made him out to be low class. Like, oh, you have a lot of money, you've created jobs, you've created wealth for other people, but ew, you didn't finish college. You don't have a cool little tweed hat and drive around in an Excalibur, and you don't have a PhD. You must not be very serious. And I remember even watching that as a much younger person and thinking to myself, that seems really snobby to me, but okay, let's keep going. But we still do it. It's 2022 and we're still doing that.
Yeah, the class thing is a really important piece of this too. I think you hit the nail on the head. I remember when I was first deciding not to go to school, not to go to college, I got so much pushback. And we talked about this a little bit last week. I got so much pushback from the community around me, all of whom were college educated. And there was this real sense that like all of these people got a sense of self-worth from having gone to school, and they were very worried about me not
Right.
having that
Right.
if I didn't go to college. And it is something people put a lot of, it's one of those extrinsic markers of your worth as a person, to be able to say, well, I went to school, I checked that box, I accomplished this thing. And none of this is to say that school is bad or doesn't make you a better person. Like, there are career trajectories that require a degree that it totally makes sense to go down that path. And there are
Right.
people who have amazing college experiences. There are wonderful professors out there. There are people who decide to go back to school because they want to, like, they just love art history and they want to spend 4 years for pleasure and personal enrichment studying art history. And they feel like a classroom is the best way to do that. It's not the only way to do that, especially in the era of YouTube. There's a lot of other ways that you can get that enrichment. But there are people who are really excited about having that experience, and there's nothing wrong with any of that. I just want to be very clear about this.
Right.
I am not disparaging college as a system in any way. There's a lot that I think is wrong with it, but it's
See,
more
I'll do that. No.
it's more like, I just want to be clear. Like, there are people who have
I
great
know. I know.
experiences.
I know.
It's the assumption that you have to have it
That's
in order to
the
be
issue.
okay.
It's like,
That's the problem. And it's not
are
well
we
examined at all.
projecting that onto our
Yeah.
kids? Is that really their choice? And, David makes this point. He says there's a lot to be said for the connections you make at colleges are very important later in business. Yes.
Yeah.
If there are two caveats there. One, is it a value? Is the value add from making those connections commensurate with what you paid for it? That's a lot of money to pay to meet people, right?
Yeah.
And to network. There are other ways to network that don't put you in debt for the next 20, 25 years. The other thing is, or having to elect a president who's going to write it off because he's magic, and doesn't mind punishing all the people who didn't go to college, who are now going to have to pay for it, who haven't even been born yet. But anyhow, but so if you can find an affordable school, or you can go sort of slowly, that's the other thing is, we think of college and we refer to something called the college experience. And people immediately picture 4 years on a campus, living there, going to class every day. And that's like your job. And maybe you have a cute little on-campus job, or maybe a little part-time job off campus, maybe, supplement your income. But the picture that people get in their mind is 4 years and I'm done. Maybe 5, maybe. But again, this is every class you're paying. Every, dorm is room and board, and then materials and all this other stuff. And a college education could be gotten across a decade. Like, it could take 6 years. It could be, you could live at home. You could be working full time and going at night. I mean, so in other words, when we say credibility without college, we're talking without the degree at all. But a lot of people are probably going to hear us saying, without that college experience. Like, no, if you really want to go to college, it doesn't need to be crammed into 4 years where you are paying through the nose on loans. But we're not even telling our kids that. We're also making them feel like if they delay that, if they push off graduation until they're 25 or 26, or even push off going, like Thomas Sowell didn't even go to college till after he'd been in the military, right? So he was already like a 26-year-old student, but he's Thomas Sowell now. So if you're going to derive your self-esteem from that to me right there is a red flag.
Yeah.
If you're going because, like any other major life decision you make or big expenditure, if you're doing it because you've really carefully evaluated the cost benefit, and am I doing this to make myself feel better about myself, or am I doing this because I need it? And I also really, really want it badly enough to pay this much, then that's a completely different decision. So what we're talking about is without the degree at all.
Yeah.
And we just want to put those boundaries around it, that when we say college, there are going to be a lot of people who go, well, what are they going to do for the next 4 years? And you're like, they could go in 4 years. They could do something else first and then decide to go.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to what David said, because I think there's actually something really important to touch on here. I think he made a really great point that there is a lot of really valuable network connections that you can make in college. Mm-hmm. And what I'm about to say is a counter to all of the arguments that people make about college. Yes, that's true. And you can make a lot of great connections outside of college too. College isn't the only place that you can go to
Right.
make a network of the same value. And I'm going to talk about this on a personal level because this has been one of the things that's been really important for me in the first, how long has it been? I'm 25. So it's been 7 years since I graduated from high school, I think, something like that. And so like over these first 7 years of my adult life, building a network has been really important for me. And I think I have a really powerful one. And I was able to do that completely outside of college. And there were a few different avenues that I found that were great sources of building network connections. Really early on out of high school, I found this online community of entrepreneurs called the Next Gen Network. It's for like college age kids and people in their 20s who want to be entrepreneurs. It's a super active Facebook group. They do a yearly conference. The two guys who run it, Justin and Dylan, are phenomenal people. They're amazing networkers, and they've built this huge community that's free on Facebook. Anybody who's interested in being an entrepreneur who comes across it can fill out the questionnaire and get approved and join. And as long as you're like a real person, they'll let you in. And I met some amazing people there who were working on starting, like they were 18-year-olds running 7-figure businesses, and people who were investors who were so excited to coach young people. And it was a really valuable community for me to be in when I was just getting started, where I didn't necessarily super tap into it. Like I wasn't in a position where I was starting a business at that point in my life or anything, but I met a lot of really great people who I connected with on Facebook, and they're like people in my network now. And then when I found Praxis, that was a huge source of network connections for me, where I was connecting with all of the people who were working for Praxis. I was connecting with all of the young people in the community who were going out and working for different companies. So like the companies that they were at became an extension of my network. Our business partners who were hiring through us became people in my network. The guest speakers who came and talked to participants every week became part of my network. And obviously, like Praxis is a program that you pay for. I was working for them, so my situation was a little different, but it's a program with tuition, but it's a lot cheaper than college is. And you're getting a job out of it at the end, which is, like you're coming out, you're breaking even, and then some, you're making money. And you're also like, so it's taking you into the workforce in a much more efficient direction than college ever could.
Yep.
And you're getting the same effect where you're building all of these network connections. I also took a writing course online, Rite of Passage from David Perel, and have made a network that's paid for itself many, many, many times over, in both a literal monetary sense and also a metaphorical sense, because of the job opportunities that I've landed through at the freelance gigs, like the friends that I've made. That's where I made the connections that's Rebel Educator was sparked out of, and all of that. Like I paid for a course and I learned a bunch through the course, but then I made an incredibly powerful network. David Perel has some huge names who've come through his course, like Packy McCormack and Anna Fabrega, if you guys are familiar with.
I know who Anna Fabrega is from,
I imagine a lot of our audience does. Yeah, she and I went through the same cohort of Rite of Passage together, and she was working in education and I was in education, and it was like, that's cool. We need to talk more often.
Right.
And there are tons of people like that who come through the Rite of Passage community who are incredibly high performers and high ambition, and who are really valuable network connections with huge networks of their own. And Rite of Passage, when I took it, it was like buying Bitcoin in 2013. It was $700 to get the lifetime access. Now it's $7,000 to do that. It's $4,000 to take the course without the like recurring access. But it pays for itself many times over. And when you're comparing that to college, it's way more effective.
Well, yeah, even cheap college is like the cheapest that I've found locally was $15,000 for 4-year school for a year. And that's cheap. That's really cheap. Like I help kids.
The network you're going to get in that is not going to be the same as like the networks are not all the same. Like you're going to you're going to meet people who are more valuable to you doing a course like David Perel's Rite of Passage or Tiago Forte's Building a Second Brain than you're going to in a college like that, where people who like aren't as competitive, generally speaking, are ending up.
Haven't even really worked in the real world.
Or don't know why they're going to college, which is another really big reason. Like people don't know what they're going to do, so they kind of go to college as a default. And I think you get a lot of people like that in these less expensive schools because they don't know what they want to do. So they're not working to get into like a more competitive college.
But then MIT is $80,000 a year.
Right. Which is
So,
ridiculous.
I don't know how people even do it. Obviously, they
Yeah.
borrow or they try to get scholarships, but let's roll that back. Just because you can find a way to come up with $80,000 a year does not make the end product worth $80,000 a year.
No.
That's
Right.
extraordinary to me.
Yeah. It is. And I think the core point here is that, yeah, you can make a lot of really valuable connections in college. And yes, you can have a great experience in college. And yes, you can learn a ton in college, but none of those things are exclusive to college. You can do all of these things in other places. And I hacked together probably more than the benefit that I would have gotten in college. This is a hypothetical statement because I did not go to college, so I don't know for certain what I would have gotten out of a college experience.
That's where I come in.
Yes, you can fill this in for me. But like my hypothesis is that, you know, I have many people in my network who have hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter and who are like running big name podcasts and are running multi-million-dollar businesses and who are people that I can call when I need advice for something or when I'm looking for an opportunity. And like, I think that's kind of the premise of a network that you get in college too, is right. You're meeting people who are doing interesting things or who know interesting people who you can call when you need something. Like that's kind of the point of a network. So I've built that outside of college. And I honestly think it's more specified for me than it would have been if I had gone to college, because I'm meeting all of these people that maybe have more niche interests than my peers in college would have had. Right. So I've gotten the same thing. And the same is true for like, well, you find a lot of career opportunities in college. Well, I've done that just fine outside of college too. We've talked about that some on the show so far, like the things that I've done and been working on. Like I'm doing fine checking all these boxes that people say you need college to check. And so like you can get all of the things that you would get in college from avenues other than college. You can do it far cheaper, far faster, and a far more tailored way than you could in college. So unless you like need the piece of paper for some legal reason because of the career path you're trying to go down, it's probably not a necessary use of your time. And the idea that you have to do it is flawed.
The other thing that you're pointing out, because when you do any kind of an apprenticeship, or let's say you go to trade school, or let's say instead of going to school at all, you go to work or you travel or you volunteer or you do like any number of things, the common denominator is there's a doing component. There's something that you're doing either with or around or in, you know, view of that network. So that builds your credibility, you know, over time. They not only see what you're capable of, but they see your attitude, they see your personality, they, you know, like no matter which of those avenues you're choosing, right? When you go to college, your professors see those things within a classroom environment for the most part, but that doesn't necessarily tell somebody on the outside in the marketplace of ideas and careers what you're capable of out there. So they'll know you're good at school, which isn't worthless. They know that that means you are diligent and you're personally responsible and you can complete projects. Again, unless they change the rules. Like a lot of colleges are getting rid of these things. I spoke with a professor the other day who said she's been quite literally ordered to eliminate deadlines for her students because it's inequitable and it causes stress and she has to let them self-evaluate and all these other kinds of things. And so employers increasingly, you know, not just employers, but even people who might want to, you know, work with you in some other capacity are looking at people and saying, I honestly don't know what your college degree means unless I'm very familiar with your specific college and your specific program and your specific, you know, professors and so forth. It's not immediately telling me what that credential isn't quite as valuable as it used to be. Whereas when you go and you've apprenticed or you've done a job or even trade school, you had to like produce something or to get a certification that involves some kind of a test of doing, then you go out and you show that, or you have references from people who say, I observed, I saw the person doing the applicable thing that they're now going to do for you or they're going to do for somebody else. So it's just fundamentally a different kind of experience. I did go to 4-year college. I was a great student. I graduated with honors. I had great, you know, references from my professors, but you know what built my credibility the most, in my opinion, like looking at what people said about my record immediately upon graduating, is what I got out of it that wasn't in a classroom. So, for example, I did a teaching internship. I lived abroad, first of all, for a year. That was like, oh, you're capable of going someplace, adapting to a completely new environment, learning a new language, figuring out life on your own, like mom, dad, everybody that you know isn't there. Okay, that's interesting. I did a business internship where I had to translate some American grant writing techniques into German for people because that was all new to them in Austria. And so when I could explain the things I did that were actual real life activities, that gained me more credibility than the piece of paper that said I had a bachelor's degree. It just did. I mean, I could see the responses of people when I talked to them. And that's not to say that there weren't people, or there still aren't people. If I say, oh, I have a BA from Colby, it was like, oh, that's a good school, blah, blah. But I feel like a fraud. I'll be honest. If that's how they're judging me, I I don't feel secure. That doesn't make me feel good about what they're expecting of me because I don't know what that means. I don't know what they're projecting into that piece of paper now. But if they instead said, I'm really impressed with this piece of work that you did and the fact that you have experience doing X, then I feel like, oh, okay, good. You actually understand what I'm capable of and we're getting off on the right foot. It's not that you see something and say, I've heard of that school and that makes you whatever. And then they're disappointed because we don't align. So that's just what I can share with the audience, that I'm a classic example of somebody who has what a lot of people want. And it didn't particularly serve me well. It was up to me. It was up to me in the end.
Yeah, and I want to highlight too the fact that the reason this is so important is because we start prepping kids for college basically in kindergarten, because
Yes.
the entire education system is predicated on college being the end goal for the high performers. And even though there's an assumption that, of course, not every student who goes to kindergarten is also going to go to college, the prep work starts for the ones who are going to go to college when they're 6 years old, because the whole system is built on that. It's working backwards from the point of trying to get kids into college. Like every assumption of the education system is built on that being one of the primary objectives.
Yep.
So it affects everything.
Yep.
And when you take away the assumption that you have to go to college in order to be successful, a lot of the assumptions that are baked into elementary, secondary education, it's all like they all fall away. They're not relevant anymore. And
So
there's
true.
so much that you can rethink. And I think it's really powerful, especially for parents who are pulling their kids out of school, to sit down and say, wait a second, what is the end outcome here? Like I've heard you say a couple times, like we're raising adults, not college students. And I love that. Like you're raising an adult, but what does that mean? Like what kind of adult do you want to be raising? What are the things that are actually important, both in terms of hard skills and soft skills and aptitudes and things that they'll do, but also like what are the different potential avenues to get them there? Because
Right.
they're not just going to follow this trajectory where they're going to go to high school, they're going to go to college, they're going to get a good job. That's what it means to raise a successful adult. There are so many options out there, and it's an ever expanding array of options because there are so many people who are working on this problem from an entrepreneurial standpoint. That there are apprenticeship programs like Praxis, the one that I worked for, and there are software boot camps like Bloom
Yep.
Tech, and there are like programs where kids can go and like immerse themselves in volunteer work or some other type of like training program for entrepreneurship. They can go through programs and boot camps where they're learning how to launch a business, and they can go through programs where they're traveling the world. And those are just the programs. Like there's so
Right.
many
They could
options.
also just go to work.
Exactly. You
And I
don't
know
need
that
a
sounds
program.
completely insane, but we had people in our chat last week who were talking about how there are industries like the gas, oil and gas, for example. They had a huge thing called the big, what did they call it? There was a name for it, but where all the older workers were like retiring and
Mhm.
falling off, the big shift change, I think they called it.
Okay.
And so they were it was just, people were just retiring and they weren't going to have enough workers. Now, I'm not saying it's easy work. I'm not saying that at all, but it tends to be, well paying, and you don't work all year necessarily. And there are some perks to it when you're young. So that's why I said, there are people who could work something out and say, you know what, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm strong. I'm going to go put in a few years working at this. I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to meet people. I'm going to make a bunch of money. My healthcare will be covered. And I'm going to take that money, right? And then I'll go to college, or then I'll go and see if I want a more advanced degree and become an engineer or become something else. But they took advantage of opportunities to go to work and get some experience in the world to refine, who am I? What do I want to spend my time doing? What kind of people do I want to be around? What kind of lifestyle do I want? Mike Rowe talks about it all the time. People who are just sort of notice a niche area that doesn't have a lot of young people in it,
Yeah.
and they go into it. And like the guy who decided, you know what? I noticed that people have septic tanks and they need them cleaned. I'm going to start a septic tank cleaning company. And the kid's like a millionaire by the time he's 25 because he started a really good septic tank cleaning. He does not personally clean septic tanks, but he saw a need where he was living and decided to do that. And lo and behold, no college is, killing it basically. And this, like I said, it's not for everybody, but I just meet too many people who didn't even think there were other options.
Yeah.
Like, no, I said at the outset, no one will take me seriously. If I don't do X, then my life is over. I'll never get a job, or all kinds of doors will slam in my face. And the specter of failure, if you don't have the college degree, is so prominent. It's like a
It's
dementor hanging
changing
over
though.
people.
It's changing though. There are more and
Oh, it
more
is.
people who are realizing that you don't need to go to school. Because also there's been this weird gap in people's thinking too, where you'll bring up successful dropouts and they'll be like, yeah, so Peter Thiel was successful, but like your kid's not Peter Thiel, so your kid can't drop out of college and be okay. There's like this weird
How do
gap
you
where, like,
know?
you have these like really wildly successful billionaires who dropped out of college and started companies. And then there's like the people on the other end of the spectrum who dropped out of college and they're playing video games in their parents' basement all day.
Right.
And
Right.
there's like this sense that there's like no middle ground. It's like you're either one or the other, or you have to go to school. And I've had conversations with people where they've said stuff like that. I'm just like, wait a second, how does that, you drop out of college and you're either like a loser or you're a billionaire? Like that's not, I don't follow. But a lot of people think
Well,
that.
and Peter Thiel wasn't always Peter Thiel either. It's like his mom and dad may not have known, when he dropped out of college, that he was going to be who he is. Who knows? But same with Bill Gates, same with, all these other people. But not that he's a great example to follow. But anyhow, I mean, if you want to be rich and successful, I guess. But that we'll have to do a show someday where we just spend the hour talking about the definition of success, because we never really defined that when we started this program. Success is pretty much what you decide it is. But for the purposes of this specific conversation, let's just say it's having enough credibility in the marketplace that you don't have, that you have options for your career, for employment, that you don't have doors closed to you. As a college graduate, I will say that I think my college degree has closed as many doors as it has opened. And every time I tell people that, they're shocked. And because they assume that, no, certainly this would have opened him. Now, I wasn't the person that wanted to go into one of the like, I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to be an engineer. Okay. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went to college for the same reason a lot of people do, because I assumed I'd figure it out when I was there, or, well, it's a good piece of paper to have for business, whatever. Mm-hmm. And bounced around and tried different things. Nothing really fit because none of it was my passion. And yet when I would try to apply for jobs that that I thought would be really interesting for me, but did not necessarily require a college degree, or they required it, but I had one from a so-called, fancy school, right? I always heard, you're overqualified. Why would you want to do this job? Well, we typically hire people from this pile of people. And they used it almost as a disqualifier, like, you're going to be hooty tooty snooty. You're going to leave. You're not going to want to do the job. You're not going to want to get your hands dirty. They made so many assumptions about me when I applied for my first job in a kitchen, when I decided I'm just going to go be a pastry chef. That's what my passion was cooking, and nobody told me I could have gone to cooking school. So I decided at 29 to sell everything I own and go to cooking school for a while and then go out into the marketplace. And I went for a job in a union shop in New York City. And I had a whole day of trial. They literally made me do the job. And I passed with such flying colors, the guy forgot I was there. It was supposed to be a couple hours. He comes back at the end of the day. He's like, "Oh my God, I totally forgot about you. You're still here." And the head chef, who's French, is like, "Oh yeah, she's very good," like whatever. So he takes me down to his office. Instead of just immediately offering me the job because I had passed with flying colors, I get this, "Why do you want this job? You have a college degree from Colby. Why do you want to be here?" He was almost trying to talk me out of it. You got to pay union dues. You can do that. And I mean, obviously that didn't thrill me, but that had nothing to do with my college degree. And he's like, "And you're going to be paid only this, and you're going to do this, and then you're going to that." And I was like, I wouldn't have come here and spent 8 hours unpaid trying out for this job if I didn't really, really want this job. And I must have persuaded him because he said, "Okay," but he always treated me like he was waiting for the shoe to drop. I had to work harder in that job to prove that I really meant it than the girl who got the night shift, who did not have a college degree. And by the way, she was a lazy good for nothing bum who left a mess. But that had nothing to do with her not going to college. It's just, it was like a disqualifier. And I don't know if other people have experienced that, but because I have tried a lot of different things in my life for jobs, I've experienced it a lot, at least as many times as, "Oh, good, you have a college degree, check." At least. So it's just something else to think about, that credibility is in the eye of the beholder too.
Yeah. And there are a lot of ways, like if there's something specific that you want to do, there are a lot of ways to prove credibility that have nothing to do with a degree. They're actually far more effective than a degree, which is something we talked about a lot when I was working for Praxis, because that's kind of the whole premise of how Praxis works. It's an apprenticeship program for young people who want to go work in startups. They want to be in the business world.
Yeah.
And they want to bypass the 4-year business school trajectory that most people default to. They don't want to be spending thousands upon thousands of dollars learning theory. They want to take the fastest route possible to go start learning in the real world. And so Praxis kind of serves as this accelerator and this kind of matchmaker where they'll help you land a job and they'll move you faster through the process of like learning everything that you need to go to go get the job. And so we spend a lot of time talking about the credibility side of things, because that's really like you're kind of going back to the drawing board as a young person who has all these assumptions about what you have to do to break into the real world. And then you're trying to bypass all that. You're like, okay, what does an employer actually care about? And for most of the non-technical roles, like not programming roles that you can land at a startup, so things like sales and marketing and customer success and operations, there kind of is a list of prerequisite skills that you have to have in order to be successful in those jobs. And working for Praxis and getting to see that was such an interesting mental exercise for me, because it really taught me how to, like, I did curriculum builds for them where I'd go through and like redesign the curriculum that we were running. And it was such an interesting exercise in first principles thinking, because you have to say like, okay, so what actually matters here? Like, where are we trying to get to? Where are we now? What is the gap between those two things that we have to fill? And what are the proper pieces to put into place to shore up that gap? And like, that's the formula. And when you solve that formula, like your answer is like, okay, well, that's the curriculum that we have to build. And so for kids going through Praxis, they need to have like, they have to have like some technical skills, like some like tools they have to know how to use, types of project work that they have to do. So like, you want to be a marketer, okay, you have to have like some sense of how marketing works, right? You have to prove your ability to do the job somehow. And probably that means like you've run some Facebook ads before, or you've managed an Instagram account before. So if you've never done marketing work before and you want to go land a marketing job at a startup, you should go do some projects where you're building Facebook ads for like a real world company, and you can do it for free and send it to the company and say, hey, I built you this thing. If you'd like it, feel free to use it. Also, like, if this is exciting to you, I'd love to do more work for you, but like, let me go build Facebook ads, or let me build an Instagram account where I'm like figuring out the strategy for marketing these really cool product that this boutique is selling or whatever. And you're building this experience, and there's all these, soft skills that you have to have too. You have to understand how to be a strong professional communicator, how to answer emails punctually, how to send calendar invites for meetings, and how to show up on time, and how to handle a negotiation and a conflict resolution, and like all of this stuff that you'll be running into in the real world. Like that's actually the prerequisites for you to be able to walk into the job on day one and know what you're doing, to have people hand you onboarding materials in your first task and say like, hey, hit me up if you have any questions, but like go do this thing. Like that's the baseline for being credible for landing an entry level job in the startup world. And so kids would go through Praxis and they build a portfolio where they choose a handful of projects that they build over the course of like 3 months. And they build some of these skills using these different technical tools that they'd be like software tools that they use in the roles, and like thinking through the types of problems that they'd have to solve on the job. They'd build a portfolio, and then they'd learn how to like send it to companies and pitch themselves for roles. Like there'd be a portion of the program that taught them that too. But they'd have this whole portfolio that's actually more valuable than a college degree, because a college degree sends a signal, hey, I sat in a lot of classes, then learned a bunch of theory about marketing, if you got like a marketing degree or something, or communications degree. Whereas their project is like, hey, their portfolio rather, they're sending all these projects over and saying, hey, I actually did a bunch of this stuff. You can actually see what my work looks like. You can read my copywriting. You can look at my graphic design. You can tell me if you like it. And if it seems like it's on par with what you're looking for, let's have a conversation. And so it's a really effective way to build credibility very quickly. And then once you've broken into the professional world, none of that matters anymore, because your job history becomes your credibility. So once you've worked as a marketer somewhere and you've done a good job, you have a good reference, you have a good portfolio, you can take that anywhere. And nobody cares about your degree status anyway. Like nobody even asks me anymore. Like
as I said, nobody cared about it like right away.
Yeah.
It became, something that if it wasn't strictly because I majored in American studies. So 99% of jobs didn't, what the heck was that going to do? Right. Oh, great. You're good at history and English classes. And so I still had to sell myself without having that portfolio. Right. So it's a good thing I went to work when I was like 15 and, at unpaid internships, and then started doing it, because at least, thank goodness, my dad had the good sense to say, you got to go to work, at least in the summertime. And I had a little fledgling resume, because that got me in the door in a lot of places where my college degree was like not applicable. Like it's nice that you have one, but it doesn't really align with this work. And you said something that I wanted to go back to too, where, you're talking about, and then you do this and you do this, you're describing initiative. You're describing kids taking initiative. And this is really important because we've been talking on this series about getting the rest of your education outside of an institution, outside of school, like K-12, typical school building. And the thing that's really important to understand, because these things all do go together, is that when a kid is relegated to classroom activities from 6 years old on, and they have to wait for the teacher to give them something to do, and that's pretty much the standard of how it works, whether it's private, public, whatever. And it's not to say there aren't some options like, oh, you've got to go do a volunteer project, or you've got to do something else for them to do things outside of school, but they keep the kids very busy, give them homework, then they might have a sport, whatever. There's not really a lot of opportunity to take big initiative like, what Hannah's describing, nor is there really the impetus to do it. So, if you have a kid who's naturally sort of reticent about taking this kind of initiative, there's nothing nudging them out of that. And if you have a kid who does have that spark when they're real little, it tends to get tamped down because it doesn't serve a real purpose, or it's explicitly not wanted in the school environment, because it's like, no, we're doing this now. Come do this. You need to do what we're doing, or you do the projects I tell you to do, and it's got to serve this purpose. And so by the time they get to be a high school student, the chance that they have a really well-developed initiative muscle is lower. And so I think it's another argument for thinking about educating your own or finding a way outside of school, because then by the time you get to this conversation about college or not college, you don't have to first think about the kid maybe going through a little boot camp and how to take initiative.
Right.
Because I do believe, and you guys can yell at me in the comments if you want, that a lot of kids go to college because it's the path of least resistance.
Oh yeah.
Debt and all, because they don't perceive the debt day one, right? It's like, I sign
Yeah.
on the dotted line and I'm, I pay the bill, whatever. But I kind of like pay it in little spurts. They're not, it's like taxes. They're not really perceiving how much it's taking from them yet. They haven't gotten their first job. They're not paying rent. They don't see what it feels like. Oh, and now I want to have a baby. Got to pay the debt and have a kid. They don't really perceive that. And so it feels just like a nice continuation of high school, but with drinking and living away from mom and dad. And now I can drive and do what I want. And it's a little bit of a delay of the adult responsibilities with the ones you wanted. Like I can party and I can sleep over with my friends. I'm sorry to put a fine point on it, but I think that's operating too.
No, I think you're spot on. And I think humans in general are very bad at long-term thinking. They're very bad at looking at the long-term cost of something and making a rational judgment about it, because it feels very easy to take out all this money, go to college, it's fun, you'll pay off the debt later, you'll probably have a good job by then, it's going to be totally cool. That's
Yep.
kind of the average high schooler's perception of it, and honestly the average parents too.
And
And
they're wrong.
it's really bad. We're really bad at being able to say, hey, wait a second, this cost, even though it's deferred, is still very real. We don't really make decisions that way. And humans as a whole are bad at that. You take young people who've never had to make real world decisions before, they're going to be even worse at this skill set. So, of course, people are making these poor decisions again and again about spending a bunch of money on something that they don't need. But it's the path of least resistance, like you said, because it's just sort of the one, everybody's pushing you down that path. Your guidance counselor isn't saying, do you want to go to school? They're saying, where do you want to go to school?
Right.
And the people around you are saying, oh, you're doing so well in school. Are you excited to go to college? Where are you thinking about? And culture is telling you that you have to have a college degree to be successful. Like, it's just baked everywhere. And so there's a lot of resistance to bucking the system and going and doing something else. So people just kind of default to it because the cost of it is so far down the line. But
Right.
it's so weird to me that people who are adamantly on board with not sending their kids to traditional school K through 12 don't have the same questions about college. It's so strange to me. And I think it's different now than it was when I was growing up. Like, I think people are more aware of this.
Right.
But when I was in elementary school and even high school, people who I grew up around who were homeschooling or had their kids in some alternative program were still thinking about, well, my kid's doing all the right things that they need to do to go to college. Like, they still assumed that that was going to be a part of the process. And to me, it's all one and the same. If you're changing, if you're questioning all the assumptions that we're making about kindergarten and third grade and ninth grade, why aren't we doing that with college too? Like, it's all the same system and it's all built on the same set of assumptions about what the right way to prepare kids for the real world is. And if one piece of it is broken, of course all of it is broken too. And so this idea that you're like, so many people build their homeschooling experiences around
college.
Yeah, around making sure, like, my family did that because we didn't know, like, we hadn't thought that far along yet. We didn't know, like, I loved school. I thought I was college bound for a very long time. And I would have loved college. Like, I gotta be honest, I would have loved college. Like, college is made for kids like me. But I realized that I would have more success and more fun doing other things. And I've never regretted for a moment not going. But like, I'm the kind of person that college was designed for.
Right.
And so, like, it made sense for us to build my education around me getting into college. My sister is very different. She probably would have hated college because she liked to do things. She's not nearly as much of a, like,
academic
nerd as I am. Like, she loves to read and stuff, and she'll happily spend a weekend curled up on the couch with a book. But she's much more of like a pragmatic, I want to be doing things in the physical world and seeing results from my actions than I was. So her education was a lot less built around the college readiness than mine was. But it was really hard for us to break out of too, this assumption. It was like, is she going to be okay if she doesn't go to school? Like, we all had conversations about that.
Right.
And that's really tough for people. But I think it's really important to have more conversations like this, because I think any conversation about K through 12 is incomplete if you're not talking about what happens next. And it's just such a disconnect for me that
Right.
it's not just the default for everybody. It seemed like once you see it, it's so crystal clear. You're just like, why doesn't everybody see
Well,
this?
it
It's
used to
weird.
be like that. And you mentioned a little while ago, you said it's kind of changing. I'm hoping it's changing back, but it used to be that, maybe 40% of Americans went to college, 60% did not. Now people say, well, we had factories back then. I'm like, we have other things instead of factories. We have startups, we have gig work, we have there are other things, I mean, it's not like, oh, the factories went away and everybody's just sitting around staring at their navels. I mean, people do other things. And so, and there are a lot of people now employed in jobs that have nothing to do with their college degree. And, they're, like I said, they may be shouldering debt, whatever. So I hope it is shifting back. I know there are some companies that are reevaluating their policies. They've had policies of must have a college degree. Like Duke Power had one like that here in Charlotte, where like, we're not even going to look at you if you don't have a degree. They're revising that because they realized a lot of people coming in with the college degree still had to be retrained in so many things. And there were people coming out of boot camps, let's say for, writing code or whatever. There were people coming out of other programs who were better at what they needed immediately. And so they had to get rid of that because otherwise they'd have to turn away some of the best candidates for these jobs. Finding that talent was very difficult. The other thing that I hope that we'll do is, with especially young kids, start exposing them to a wider range of jobs. Stop poo-pooing blue collar. I hate the term even, blue collar, white collar. It shouldn't mean anything other than, I might get my hands dirty at work. I might not get my hands dirty at work. That's like all it should mean. It shouldn't be a class distinction. And unfortunately, we're still doing that. We do it in entertainment. We do it in the way we talk in school. We do it when we talk about other people in front of our kids. And the message comes through loud and clear, especially if you and your spouse were college educated. I have to be like mom and dad. And if I'm not, that might be a problem. So I think we're at a point where we have to give them explicit messages that, you need to do what's right for you. Not necessarily, and also, especially if you went to college a long time ago, it's not even the same thing. So, for me at my age, like I have to tell my kids, like, yeah, it's not even close to the same experience. So anyway, but the credibility component, I think, is tied to that. I don't think, in other words, there's the credibility the way you're talking about it, literally. Like, can you do a job? Do I want to hire you? The way we should think about it, right? I'm a person presenting myself for an opportunity. Person A has college degree, person B does not. Does this person have equal credibility with that one? Here are some ways that you can make sure that you do. Okay. Have some work in a portfolio, have some things that you've done to compete with the person who has a piece of paper. But I would like to challenge it that this person with the piece of paper has an uphill climb too. They're not so far apart as you think.
Yeah.
So even though we put the title credibility without college, there are some fields, some worlds where you might have to have credibility with college. You might have to go and say, yes, I know I went to Harvard, but I promise you, I actually am not an arrogant jerk or something. I mean, I'm just saying that is a possibility these days. That somebody could say, we've seen FedEx commercials, remember? The guy says, you don't understand. I have a Harvard MBA. And she says, oh, then I'll have to do it for you. The lady comes in and does it for the guy. That's a whole commercial. So, that's an attitude out there.
Yeah. And I think that there's, to your point about the social distinctions too, I want to come back to that really quickly, because I think there's something really important here, actually. I think it's really important to expose kids and adults too, because a lot of us carry these stereotypes with us, but especially kids, expose them to people who don't fall into these black and white distinctions of different categories of people. One of the first people that comes to mind is Eric Hoffer, the writer. I don't know if you're familiar. He's written he was a social philosopher, wrote a number of critically acclaimed books, very oft referenced. He worked as a longshoreman in San Francisco. He was not a trained academic. He was working a very blue collar job. and he was writing on his breaks in between like loads of freight coming in. And he went on to be, he was a brilliant thinker. And I think there are so many amazing examples of people who are working as truck drivers and are listening to amazing, like interesting podcasts on their drives back and forth across the country, and are becoming incredibly well versed on different topics, and are go on to have like really amazing, insightful ideas about the world and education. And I have a friend who was, unschooled, amazing story. Dad was a truck driver, like not somebody who's a very, I don't know, hoity-toity, like type of person that you would like look at and go, oh, that's an admirable career. And yet had amazing insights on education and created a phenomenal, honestly, kind of groundbreaking education experience for his kids. Like there's so many stories like that I think is really important to expose kids to, because it's
and
very
yourself.
easy to think in boxes. Yeah, and yourself.
And yourself, because I know adults who are not happy in their careers.
Yeah.
And then they think, well, oh, but I, have to do this, have to do that. And it's like, well, what's missing from your life? And then you'll find out that what's missing from your life is any kind of, like personal growth. Like you said, listening to podcasts or reading books. They miss reading. They're like, I really wish I could just sit and read a book. Why can't you? Oh, I have all this work to do for my job, but it doesn't. And then you think, well, is there a job you could get that might be, you might think is like beneath you or whatever, but it involves a lot of sitting around or a lot of downtime where you could read books and yet do your job. I have a friend who does work in oil and gas and has to sit on a rig and do, a lot of things like that, where he's just sitting for days with no access to any other kind of entertainment, and puts me to shame, reads like hundreds of books a year.
Yeah.
And
my friend TK Coleman, who was my mentor at Praxis, he was one of the founders of Praxis, and he was the education director for years. He's phenomenal. He does keynote speeches all over the country, and he's a co-host of the Minimalists podcast now. Early in his career, he went to college and got a degree, but then he wanted to go work in nursing homes, the night shift, because it gave him time to read. Like that was his stated purpose for working this job, is that it was quiet at night. He'd sit in the office. If anybody needed anything, he'd go help, but he could just read all night, and he could read like 6-7+ hours a day at least, because he was just hungry to consume information. And that was the career path that like he knew. He had this innate sense that like, I need to read and become smarter so that I can his path, he was just curious, but his path has evolved in such a way where he's such a huge net positive force in the world because of all of this information that he has, that he's synthesized and distilled into like really poignant and pragmatic life insights that he's directing toward young people. Like there are so many young people who've been so dramatically positively impacted by TK.
Yeah. And that is the best thing about having these conversations, is that, we're I hope surfacing ideas that people hadn't thought of.
I hope so.
And just piquing their curiosity. If nothing else, guys, we obviously can't in 1 hour go through all the possible ideas for how to get credibility without college. What we're hoping to do is just pique your curiosity enough to have you say like, oh, wait, there are other options that are not just trade school, for example, or they're not just go get a job. There are, like you said, there's Praxis, there are apprenticeship programs. There's, do some work on spec, do some work for a volunteer organization while living with your folks. And then, take that as your portfolio to a company and say, I have experience here's my portfolio. And you can compete with the college kid who maybe doesn't have a real world portfolio, so that you've gained credibility that way. We just want you to start thinking outside those boundaries that are really artificial. They don't have anything to do with reality as it actually is. And remember too, that reality is evolving. As Hannah pointed out, companies are changing how they look at the college degree. Colleges themselves are changing their standards. So they're changing how they grade. They're changing whether they take SAT scores. So the composition of the student body is changing. So I've heard from parents to say, but I want my child to have the experience of being around other really smart people and, learning from them. And they may well be, but they also may not. You have to look at
other places you can have that too.
You can have that too, and be aware that a lot of these schools are not what they were even 5 years ago, because they've fundamentally changed their mission. You may agree with it, and that's fine, but just research it first. Don't assume that your alma mater is exactly what it was when you went there. The chances are about 100% that it's not. So I hope this has been illuminating for you. And please, any other questions that you have, please hit us up. You can reach Hannah and on well, what's the best way to reach you? Is it like through Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter's the best. I spend a lot of time on Twitter these days. You can find me you can find my personal Twitter at Hannah Frankman, but at Rebel Educator is the one where I'm posting most frequently about education. So that's probably the best place
Yeah.
to find me.
And I'll go back and add like the Praxis link. I put it in the chat, but I'll go back and put that. But just, think about what else could you do, and remember that it's not a race, right, Anna? Like, you don't have to go the day after. You don't have to have a place to go the day you graduate high school. You could go later if you decide
Yes.
that that's necessary. So, or your child or whoever we're talking about at this point. Anything that I missed that you like to add before we sign off
I
today?
don't think so. I think we covered
Okay.
it.
I think so. I think it's good that at least we gave them a definition of credibility. Yours may vary, as it always happens, but we wanted to give you ours.
Yep.
Anyway, thanks everybody for coming. We will be back next Tuesday with another episode of Success Without School. And I thank you all for coming. Please like, share, and subscribe as per usual. And we are out.